The word tariff is dominating global news headlines once again. Over the last several years, the U.S. has initiated a massive wave of protective trade measures, specifically targeting imports from trade rivals and core allies alike, with sweeping new tariffs. To understand why these policies exist, we have to look at the math of a simple competitive disadvantage. Imagine a standard loaf of bread produced domestically for $3. A foreign manufacturer, leveraging lower costs, can export that same loaf for just $1. Naturally, consumers gravitate toward the cheaper option, creating an immediate crisis for local bakeries that cannot cut prices low enough to compete. To protect local jobs and infrastructure, the government steps in. They apply a $3 border tax to the imported bread. That additional fee drives the retail price of the import up to $4, making the local $3 loaf the more affordable choice. It seems like a straightforward solution for saving domestic industries, but when governments deploy multi-billion-dollar trade barriers on a global scale, we have to ask, whose wallet is actually funding that tax? Governments calculate these border taxes using two primary frameworks. This diagram shows a specific tariff, a rigid, flat fee applied regardless of the item's market value. If the state sets a $3 fee, that exact same amount is added to a $2 import and a $100 luxury import alike. But modern trade policy relies far more on an ad valorem tariff. As the graphic updates, you can see how this percentage-based tax scales dynamically. A 20% duty adds $2 to a $10 item, but commands a $20 fee on a $100 product. This architecture is how governments apply the extreme 100 or 200% duties we see in international news. While political rhetoric often frames these as taxes paid by the foreign exporting nation, the financial reality is quite different. When a container ship arrives at a port, the domestic importing company must pay the customs duty up front, in cash, before their goods are legally allowed to enter the country. Importing businesses rarely absorb these massive tax hits. Instead, they pass the exact cost of the tariff down the supply chain to maintain their viability. This shifts a final bill directly onto the domestic consumer at the retail level. If tariffs act as a hidden tax on citizens, why do governments still view them as vital economic tools? The answer lies in their ability to shield industries and generate sovereign revenue. A textbook example occurred in 1983. Harley-Davidson, an American icon, saw its domestic market share for heavy motorcycles crater to just 15%. The collapse was driven by an absolute flood of lower-cost, high-quality Japanese imports from companies like Honda and Yamaha, which were rapidly displacing local manufacturing. The U.S. government intervened with a temporary 45% tariff. This gave Harley-Davidson the necessary breathing room to overhaul its assembly lines and modernize its quality control to compete again. South Korea used a similar strategy in the 1960s to incubate nascent automakers like Hyundai. Crucially, the government tied this protection to strict technological benchmarks and export mandates, forcing the company to modernize while foreign competition was locked out. This shows that tariffs can work as a temporary shield, but only when the government ties that protection to performance mandates that force the domestic industry to improve. Without those mandates, permanent tariffs can lead to structural decay. When domestic manufacturers are completely insulated from foreign competition, they often grow inefficient. They lose the incentive to innovate or streamline production because consumers have no choice but to buy their protected products. This insulation also triggers retaliatory cycles. When one nation heavily taxes imports, the targeted country often strikes back. We saw this during the 2018 U.S. China trade conflict, where sweeping U.S. tariffs were met with immediate, aggressive countermeasures to inflict maximum economic pain on U.S. agricultural exports, hitting farmers where they were most vulnerable. The fallout was severe. American farmers faced devastating market access losses, eventually requiring multi-billion-dollar government bailouts to keep the agricultural sector afloat. According to Moody's Analytics, the trade war cost the U.S. economy an estimated 300,000 jobs and triggered a 0.3% reduction in real GDP as supply chains struggled with price inflation. Despite the intense political posturing from both superpowers, the clear structural winner of the conflict wasn't the U.S. or China, it was Vietnam. To bypass the tariff walls, multinational corporations rerouted their global supply chains, funneling billions of dollars in direct capital investments into Vietnamese industrial zones instead of American or Chinese factories. Tariffs are not magical barriers. While they can incubate infant industries under very specific conditions, they ultimately function as a systemic inflation tax on the working class consumer and a catalyst for global economic instability.